Thank you, Nathan. And before we go on to Armin's question, everyone gets courses on entrepreneurship and making money and all kinds of courses people sign up for. But what better course than lose your fear, right? Grow and become love and get rid of your fears. That's going to help you with so many things in your life. So, you know, give it a good consideration. And I love Nathan's work, and he's a great friend. So we are very supportive here of what Nathan's up to, and think it's a really great way to practically apply Tom's work and theory to your life in very specific ways, tailored just for you with a really sensitive teacher like Nathan. So definitely want to encourage and recommend anyone who's interested to check that out. So let's move on to Armin's question. Armin, if you want to ask it, you have the floor, my friend.
Thank you. Nice to be here, especially on an anniversary. And Fear Clinic sounds very interesting. Thank you, Nathan. I will mail you about that. Well, my question, I have two questions. They're very much connected, but I've divided them to two parts. It's regarding remote viewing. So I will read the first question here. There are, according to some well-experienced remote viewers that worked in this target program, that there are limits to how many hits and how much on the target you can be. The estimate is around 65%, some says, and in some rare cases better. Joe McMoneagle has written about this in his books and says that he himself cannot produce a session when there is a waterfall. And others in the RV community says that one's interests of the target can affect the data coming in, if it's something that is interesting or not. So my question is, could you address above statements and give your thoughts and takes on the limits of RV? And I'm wondering if we ourselves can put limits with accessing the data and perhaps could get better if one would eliminate the beliefs.
Okay, let me answer that part first, and then you can go into your second part. There is no fundamental limitation on how clear and how correct the data can get. All of those limitations are brought by the remote viewer. In other words, they're all created by the person doing the remote viewing. And the reason that everybody in remote viewing agrees that it isn't perfect, they may say that it can't be perfect, but what they're saying really is that it's very difficult for them to keep their mind that focused, that clear, that detached, and for long periods of time. So the issues are all things about the people who are doing it. Now there are people. We did a little talk about it some years back with some from children, and it was called Seeing Without Eyes. And what these children could do is they, with a blindfold on, and not a flimsy little blindfold, but a big, massive blindfold that, was about that big. It covered everything. It was about a half an inch thick and went all the way out around the face. They were able to play, read books. They could read a book that would be held up in front of them. They would read the book. They were playing air hockey. And if you've ever played air hockey, that's a very fast game. That puck really moves fast, and it's one that stretches your, how quickly you can react to something. So they were a couple of kids with blindfolds on were playing air hockey, and they obviously weren't just moving their hands around randomly. They were blocking shots and making shots, and so all that is remote viewing in real time. So if you get a remote view of where you are now, and then a tenth of a second later now, and a tenth of a second later now, you get that fast enough, and you've got a movie. You've got real-time remote viewing. So a remote viewer is not limited to just looking at a thing or a target. They can actually do that in real time. Some people who have been born blind learn how to remote view in real time, and now they can see. They can even drive a car because they can remote view in real time. But that's pretty rare, but it does happen. Now, what are these constraints? Yes, the one you mentioned was that if you have interest in it, in a subject, or if it's a subject that uh, twangs one of your fears, or any sort of number of things that actually draws you into an interest in it, then it's easy to lose the fact that you need to be neutral things. You need to just get the data, not add to it. And if you get interested in it, you start adding to it. Information comes to you from only three sources. There's only three possibilities where the information comes from. One's the larger conscious system. One is some other individuated unit of consciousness, and the other is yourself. And most of the noise that remote viewers get comes from themselves. It's stuff out of their own mind that comes and causes them the problem. Now, as I recall, Joe McMoneagle got up around 80%. He got better than that 60 or 70. He was doing more around 80%. With practice, the more you do it, the more confidence you build. The more confidence you build, the more relaxed you are. The more relaxed you are, the more control you have over your mind, and the more you can stay off to the side, not get involved. As soon as you get involved, you've got trouble. That's not the thing. So you have to not be interactive with the data. And people who have trouble not interacting with things that interest them or mean something to them, you see, we're going to have that problem. So you have to stay detached. And what I mean by detached isn't that you don't care, it's that you don't have any ego in it. Your ego or your fear is not connected to any of it. So often, here's a good example, people who see visions of earthquakes and tornadoes and terrible things happening and a huge die-off of people, great storms and those kinds of things, the doom and gloom that's coming upon us. Most of those people, well, even the really good remote viewers, they will see some information that is accurate, that they have remote viewed, and it's accurate information for the probable future. But they just can't help having a comment about it. They can't help interacting with it because this is about them and their loved ones and their grandchildren. And, whatever the date is, it's personal. So when I read those kinds of things, generally you can read here's where the real information now here's where the remote viewer is struggling with their own, with their own self relative to that information, but it's all modeled together. And now they've left that subject, and now you'll get something that's clearly a good remote view out of the future probable database, and now you see a lot of muddled stuff follows it. So you have to, kind of read between the lines of those kinds of things and seeing what is the stuff that's fresh and what is the stuff that's kind of elaborating on the story. And typically the elaboration on the story is kind of suspect rather than meaningful. The first things that come and get reported often are true. And, remote viewers can review, the future probability. And some of those probabilities, of course, will change because they're just probabilities, but some of them are pretty stable. So that's the first answer to your question. There is no restrictions that come with remote viewing that make it impossible for a remote viewer to not get it right 100% of the time, except the fact that remote viewers are human. And with human comes all kinds of other stuff, ego, wants, needs, drives, attitudes, and all of that tends to get in the way. And that's the thing. So the more you practice, the better you get. And when you realize that it's yourself that's getting in the way, then you can kind of work and practice on that and make it better. But a lot of times they don't really realize that. They just know that sometimes they get good stuff and sometimes they don't. And they're not really aware of why. Because those three sources of data I told you about, they don't have tags. You don't know. It's not like something says, well, now you're getting this from yourself. Now you're getting this from the LCS, now you're getting this from somebody else. You never know. And there's no way to know for sure. There's always some uncertainty about that. With experience, you get better at making those choices, deciding between sources. But I don't think you'll ever get to the point where there is no uncertainty. There's always uncertainty. So that answers your first question, I think. What's the second?
Yeah, absolutely. Open-minded skepticism, right? Yes, about what you said. Yeah, my second question, I think I will modify it a little bit because one thing popped in my mind because I would like to explore remote viewing missing persons. That seems it's important thing. I think I would like to explore, but the thing is, I'm on a course right now with a Stargate remote viewer, and it's going very well. And we're going to try some missing persons later on. But I've noticed that I get many different bits and pieces. Example was the last session was a blind target, and the picture envelope was a military boat and a submarine with nuclear stuff on it. And it was buildings around this ship, but I only got the submarine and the weapons on the boat, nothing else. And the target was to describe the area, the whole area. And I was in this session for almost an hour and just got like nuclear stuff and the weapon and the submarine. Um, and 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 with regards to missing people, it seems difficult sometimes to query where a person might be because a wood can be so big or a map can be so big. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about those things, the
Sure.
queries.
You should, if you were going to find a person someplace, locate someone, you need to have some tools for that, some ways of going about it systematically. So you can look at a map where you see, say, the world, if you want to make it a big search, right? You can look at a world map, and then you can let that map be on a globe, and then you can let the globe spin. And your intention is that when you get to where that person is, you'll see a light. You'll see like a little white light will come from that spot. Well, now this is just something you're making up, right? It's part of your own creation. It's a tool. But if you work with tools like that, the tools can become very effective. All the tool's doing is helping you focus your intent very specifically on a certain piece of information and let everything else go. Now, the problem with being human is that it's hard for you to keep your intellect and your thoughts out of the process. It's hard for you to be detached. So you get your globe and you look at it and you really want to see a piece of light. Well, that's a problem. If you really want to see it, now that gets in the way of seeing it. That's not detached. So the wanting to see it gets in the way. Now that seems, no, it sounds like we're getting a little zenny here, hearing like the sound of one hand clapping, right? The reason you're doing it is because you want to see the light, but wanting to see it makes it not work, But you have to understand, one's a desire to accomplish something. That's done in your intellect. Then you put that aside, and then you get into your intuition. And when you're in your intuition, you'll just see what's there. You don't have any preconceived notions. You just will spin the globe and see what happens. And if nothing happens, that's okay. If something happens, that's okay. And it's not like, gee, I really need to see some light. Okay, turn the globe. No, that's not there. No, it's not there. And that is your intellect analyzing and assessing and judging. And that'll keep anything from happening. You'll never see any light anywhere. So you have to be detached from what it is that you're doing. And that's very hard for humans to do. So it takes a lot of work, a lot of practice. But you can develop tools like that you just make up. All right, I see a spot, in somewhere in the middle of the United States. Well, where? Now you switch to a map of the US. And now you switch after that, you locate it someplace. Now you have a map of that state. Now you have a map of that county. Now you get a map of that, that 50-foot area. You just keep honing in with various tools until you get to where you want. And because you're like zooming in, you can keep track of where you're zooming. In other words, you can keep track of where it is, at what point, where in that state, where within that state, where are you? And if you get confused, you can ask for, well, are there any landmarks nearby? See, that's another part of your tool. So then you scan around and you say, well, okay, now where is this person relative to that landmark? So you get a picture big enough to take in the person and the landmark. You see, so that you develop tools. So you should have 7, 8, 10 tools, maybe more, in your toolkit to pull out for various situations when they apply. That lets you come up to your answer one step at a time, instead of just, I want the answer, bang. That doesn't often work that way. When you do a query in Google, how many times do you just go to Google and put in what, here's what I want to know, and you put it in and exactly what you want to know comes back? Not that often, right? That's kind of a rare event. You put something into Google and what comes back is, well, it's related, but it's not exactly what I want. So let me change the query a little bit and see if I get something more I want. That goes out, well, a little closer, but that's not right either. And you have to work into a series of queries to get yourself closer and closer and closer to something that is what you want. Well, this works the same way. You can query and get some information that's useful to help you make a better query, which will give you some information that will help you make a better query. So have a set of tools that you work up to this, and each one of your tools, you have to approach it very objectively and detached. Just see what happens. And if nothing happens, okay, back up to the last place where it did happen. Recheck that. Come up with a different tool. You just keep working at it from different directions. And when you hit a dead end, instead of saying, didn't work, can't do it, find another approach. Think, how else can I approach this problem? All right, let me do the opposite. I want to be just with this person in the same room that they're in. And then instead of homing in on them from a bigger picture, I'm going to zoom out from a little picture. I'm going to start with them, and then I'm going to start with the room they're in, and then the house, and then, the subdivision the house is in, and I'm going to start backing up that way. And if that doesn't work, what's another way? You just, all the different approaches you can think of. And part of the value in that is that after you've tried 3 or 4 different approaches and you're searching and searching for another way to look at it, you start getting more and more detached. Just the process itself can help you get detached, because you lose your, I want to see it. And you get more in there, well, just try this. Okay, let's just try that. You've kind of relaxed and are no longer have so much ego and need for it to work. And that's good, because it works when you don't have the need for it to work. The need gets in the way. That's part of your ego and your intellect. So sometimes the tools will help you even when they don't work. Just by working with the tools will help put you in a better mind frame for getting right answers. So that's, I guess, the best answer that I can give to you. And you have to make up your own tools. I mean, you can talk to other remote viewers and say, well, what are the tools you use? What's the process you go through? And they'll tell you their tools. And you can try their tools, but their tools may or may not work for you. You're different. You have a different perspective. Your mind works differently. You have different attitudes and ideas and feelings and connections to things. And you'll have to find your own tools, which takes time because you just have to work over years in the point that you work out methodologies that work. And all of these remote viewers that are already good at it have done that. They spent years working out methodologies that work for them, but it doesn't mean that those methodologies are golden and will work for everybody. It just means they work for them. So always have that in mind when you're using other people's tools. Sometimes other people's tools will work great for you because you're similar in some ways, but other times they don't. And then people have this attitude, oh, it didn't work for me, so I must not be very good at this because he's a really good remote viewer and that works for him. Why doesn't it work for me? I'm not as good. And now, of course, all of that doubt just makes everything much harder. You've just put a whole lot more stuff in there for your ego, to get twisted around. So you have to not be negative. Do it all from a positive position. Does that help you, Armand?
It really does. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Armand. We're going to move on to our next question. We have Will here today. Will, would you like to ask your question, buddy?
Hey, Tom. Okay, I got two questions. Do I only get to ask one? I only get to what? One today, or does it? All right. Anyway, I got.
We'll make it concise, right?
I will ask my questions quickly, and I don't think they'll take very long. Okay. So my first question is, fasting. Okay. Now, as one of the things that Sylvia said in her book is she remembered you running around fasting. My question for you is it worth it? And what kind of insights did you get? Is it something where you went back and you said, you know what, I didn't really need to do that to get to the same place? Or is it something where you're like, yes, that really did take my clarity to the next level and that helped me? So I was just wanted to, if you could just give me a very simple kind of like idea of, is it time for me to really try to do those fasting and will it help me to get to the next level of clarity, which is what I'm really looking for.
Okay. I started fasting probably in around 1970 or so. And I would do a 7-day fast. And that 7-day fast meant water only. No food, no juice, nothing like that, just plain water. And I could have as much water as I wanted. So there was no limit on water, but that was the only thing. So what I found is in that first 7-day fast is that one, the first 2 days are difficult. And after that, it's not so difficult. The sense of hunger starts to dissipate. And rather than being difficult because you're hungry, it becomes difficult because it's socially awkward. We have a lot of socialization happens around food and around meals. And you have to go be part of that socialization, but sit there and not participate in the eating. So you'll sit there with your glass of water while everybody else is eating, and that makes you really an odd person to be there. So that's the downside of it, is that it's more socially disconcerting than it is, a problem because you're hungry. On this, like I say, after 2 days, the hunger thing kind of disappears. Your body realizes you're not feeding it, and it might as well get used to it. So it just gives up on the feed me thing and stops. And so that's not really that hard to go 7 days without eating. At the end of that 7 days, the first time, a lot of really wonderful things happened to me. One, all kinds of physical problems that I was having, problems with digestion, problems with, even something as common as like athlete's foot. Almost everything healed itself and stopped being a problem, and none of it started up again. So for several years, I'd had these indigestion problems with too much acid in the stomach or something, and diarrhea, and just wasn't working well. get up in the morning and have something to eat and be attacked with diarrhea, a half an hour later. That was kind of my life. And you learn to live with things like that. You accommodate it. You learn how to get by, And I had done that for some years. But then after the fast, gone. Didn't happen anymore. And I'd had that problem for years. So it did fix some things like that. And even the athlete's foot that I had been having trouble getting rid of just disappeared. So physically, I got much better. Everything that I thought was physically a problem just disappeared completely in 7 days and did not come back. Now, as far as the consciousness goes and the mental part of it, I did feel more clarity. I did feel more aware. My thoughts were not racing. They were calm, but with more depth than usual. I wasn't so easily interrupted in my thoughts as before. Mostly humans kind of focus on this for 10 seconds and then something comes into their mind and then something else comes into their mind and we kind of jumping around. And while fasting, I was a lot more focused on what I was doing. I could keep my attention and my focus much better. And after the fast was over, a lot of that stayed. It didn't go away. You kind of learn a new mode of being. So my first fast was fabulous as far as its productivity. My second fast, not so much. A few more odds and ends fell into place, and it was nice. And I enjoyed the calmness. I enjoyed the clarity. But when it was all over, maybe I gained a little bit of difference, but it wasn't dramatic like the first one. And then the third one, and the fourth one, and the fifth one, each one wasn't as big effect as the last one. And I think what was happening is I had my body cleaned out. I was eating much better. I'd learned some things about, I didn't want my body to go back to that dysfunctional state. So I was kind of careful about what I ate, and my diet got cleaned up in the process. I started to pay attention to my intuition as far as what to eat and what not to eat. So by the time, let's say 10 years later, and I fasted every February, that was just a time when nothing much was going on. Because I say it's the social aspects that are more difficult than the physical and mental aspects. So, February, when nothing's really going on, you pick a week that there's no holidays, no celebrations, nothing happening, and you do it that week and keep a low profile. That's kind of my thing. Now, I went to work. I didn't like stay home or anything. My day when I was fasting was just like my day always was. I'd get up, I'd go to work, I'd play with my kids, I'd talk to my wife, it was just a normal day. I'd have to be productive at work and so on. So I didn't like stay home and fast or go to some place to fast. I just lived with it on a normal day. So I found diminishing returns. And I think the diminishing returns of the fasting was just the fact that I'd cleaned my body out and I wasn't trashing it up again. I was being more careful of what I ate. So I'd go my next fast, the body was already clean. It didn't have a lot of garbage to unload. So it just didn't have as big an effect for me. So that's my story on fasting. It can be very valuable. It was to me, and the most valuable was the first time. But I did it for years. 1 week every year, I would fast for seven days. The people who have problems with it are people who can't get their intellect to sit down and be quiet. Same with meditation. They worry over it. The more they worry, and pretty soon one worry leads to the next worry, and oh no, what if I'm hurting myself and this and that, and they build up a big story and it just doesn't work. They kind of implode because it's something different and they have fear surrounding it. So it's best just to say, I'm going to do it until it hurts or it doesn't feel good anymore. And when it feels like it's a problem, I'm going to quit. Don't get it like I'm going to I'm going to make my 7 days, whether it kills me or not. I don't think that's a good attitude. You say, I'm going to start this thing. I'm going to take it a day at a time and see. If I feel all right tomorrow, I'll do it, for another day. If I feel all right then, I'll do it another day. And when you don't feel all right, you might say, well, let me see if this passes. I'll give it a couple hours, see if this passes. And if it does, we'll continue. If it doesn't, quit. You have to be reasonable with these things. You can't be too headstrong about, I'm going to do this thing, whatever. Everybody's different. Everybody's biology is different. Some people's biology may be in a very delicate balance. And if you do something like that, you could hurt yourself. Some people's minds are in a delicate balance. You could go off into some inner space thing and have trouble coming back. It's hard to say. And all of these things where you're exploring the unknown, explore them carefully, one step at a time, and always know your way to back out if it doesn't seem to be working for you. So that would be my advice. Don't just rush into something and do it, because Tom told you about some crazy stuff he did. I've done a lot of crazy stuff in my life. That's just me. I tend to do things like that. So anyway, be cautious. And if it works good for you, then do it the next year and keep doing it until you don't see much, it's just not doing much for you. And then it's time to let it go. But yes, you will find clarity. You'll find your mind is more like it is in a meditation state than normally. And the hunger's not a problem.
All right. So Tom, I've got another question. It's a quick one. I got in a major accident on Sunday. I was driving and somebody got impatient coming in the other direction, and it was a full head-on collision. I was rushed to the hospital, and with a possible broken nose and internal bleeding. And so there's a couple of guys that are actually, and I have a meditation group with a couple of guys that are here right now, Adam and Nathan. And I sent a text out to the group and I said, hey, listen, I'm about to go into a CAT scan. Please send me, this healing energy. And, if you could. And so Brandon, which has been, he's in MBT too. I don't know if you remember him, but Brandon basically got the message and he was just going down for a meditation session. And then he did this thing where he basically took a whole lot of emotion that he had inside of him, kind of like when you're watching an emotional movie and you get really choked up, and he took all that emotion and then he had a focused intent and he fired it towards me. And the time that he did it, I was able to record that time and the amount of time that he did it. And I felt it the entire time that he was doing it very specifically. And so then, since then, I've started to realize that the being level, like intent that it takes to heal, is the same thing as this emotion. So I've been trying to heal people. And then Brandon actually had a kid today, and we were all sending like, this healing energy, and the baby came out in 7 minutes. And so, and with after 5 contractions, which we all think is amazing. And so he's a father of second daughter today. So congratulations, Brandon. But my question is this: is that every time I do this healing, and I get all that welled up emotion, like I can do it for 30 seconds or a minute. And at the end, like I'm basically like, there's tears coming out of my eyes, like I feel spent, but I've watched you like meditating and sending healing energy, and you are not like wrecked at the end of this. And so I was wondering, is there like a subsection? Can I dial it down? Am I just blasting like a light and I should be blasting like a laser? Like, I was wondering if you could just give me a couple tips on that healing energy, because now I have a good idea of like what it is, like the amount of push that it's going to take. But what I don't know is like if there's a way of like honing that so that I don't basically just spend myself every time I do it. So if you've got some insights on that, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, there is a way to hone that so that you don't spend yourself as you do it. What you're doing is you're using your emotion to create intensity. Okay, the intensity of your intent is important. If it's a low intensity intent, that's like, dropping your penny in the wishing well. Oh, I intend to be rich. Well, that doesn't have much power because the intensity is very casual. If you want to heal someone, the more intensity you have, the better you'll do, the more effect you're going to have. And you're using your emotion to create that intensity. With practice and with time, you'll learn to be able to create that intensity without a lot of emotion to go with it. Intensity of feeling is kind of a more scattered thing. Feeling bad, feeling anxious, feeling good, feeling happy. Feelings tend to be a broader thing. They're not real focused. So you can focus your intent very strongly without the emotion. But before you know how to do that, the best way to focus your intent is with emotion. That does focus your intent. So you're using it. It's a tool that you're using. But as you continue to practice and grow, you find that the emotion is less important, and the focus and intensity you have is really just the intensity of your mind, of your wanting, of your desire to do this. And the desire has to be for the right reason. It's because you just want to be helpful, because you care about that person, because you want them, you want them to be better. You want to, be part of their solution, not because you want to develop great skills and be a wizard, not because you want people to be impressed with, how good you're doing. All of that's ego blather, and that gets in the way. And that intensity doesn't have to be connected with emotion. Now, most people, intensity of their thought and emotion are connected. That's when they are intense, is when they're emotional. But those are two different things. You can provide a very intense thought, and you can do that very casually. You don't have to be emotional to do it. So in our mind, the two go together. They're kind of bonded, emotion and intensity, because that's just the way what an untrained mind, functions. That's when they find intensity, is when they're emotional, but it's not necessary. Those two can be separated. It just takes practice. I found that out kind of by circumstance when I was out at the lab with Bob and doing a lot of healing. We'd probably do 5 or 6, 7, 8 healings, almost every time we went out, just because that was a good mode to get feedback and so on. And then I found that sometimes, I'd be effective. Sometimes I wouldn't be effective. And I was trying to sort that out and find, what was the difference? What are the parameters that make you effective and make you non-effective? And I was just in a process of studying all that sort of thing. And I noticed that sometimes I would do my healing in 15 seconds, very casually. And the results were astounding. And I'd go look at that and, was that really me? And I'd experiment enough with it. And I found that I could be as effective very quickly as I could be when I spent, 15 minutes pushing on it and pushing it out there and, doing all that work. And that it had more to do with the intensity of the thought, not with the emotion behind the thought. So that's when I kind of, what I'm telling you, that's when I realized this myself, when I just perchance was able to heal someone with a very casual thought. I really wanted them to heal with a lot of intensity, even though there was no oomph, emotion behind it. And then I learned to try to separate those two. For then the next 6 months, that's me experimenting on trying to sort out, the difference between the emotions and the intensity and what worked and what didn't. And it just takes time to work through all of those sorts of things. I guess it helps out if you're going to the lab with Bob and you're doing this 20 hours a week, you get there a lot quicker when it's not just 1 hour a weekend. So I had a little advantage there. I was in a situation where I had a lot of time to work on things. But yeah, you'll eventually come to that same realization and conclusion after a while. But emotion does work. It does help raise the intensity, but it's not necessary.
That's great. Thank you. That is exactly what I was looking for, Tom. That really clarifies. I think I really understand what you mean by intensity, but at least it will give me a place to move to as I'm trying to figure out how to hone my focus intent and also how to heal people better. So thank you
Yeah.
guys. And
Another way to say, maybe another way to say it is, when you love someone, when you care about someone, you don't always have to be emotional in feeling very strongly about that love, about that caring, about that person. I mean, it can be attached to emotion. You may feel emotional, but you also can just really, really have a lot of love that you feel without being emotional about it. It's the same sort of thing. You can have a lot of focus, a lot of intent without emotion.
do you mean loving intent? So you don't just mean have intent to heal, like you're like
Right.
it has to be like the effervescence of like the outpouring of love towards that
That's
person, that extreme loving feeling of intensity is what you're talking about right
that's part of it. Yes, that helps. Love is the key. Love is the
there. Love is the
things that
answer. Yeah,
makes things happen.
love
So
is the answer.
yes, but I'm giving it to you as an example because most people have felt love for someone, something, even it's their kitten, or their dog. They have something they just love. And that most people would have an experience of feeling this love very strongly, but without emotion. You may just look at your dog or your girlfriend or your wife or your children and you just feel a lot of love there. And it's intense, but it's not emotional. So the reason I brought that up was just as an example. If you want an example of intensity without emotion, well, I think most people have that experience where they really love somebody and it's an intense feeling, but not necessarily emotional. Well, that's what I'm getting at. And yes, love is part of the process. Is when you're healing, you have to really, it's not that you have to love the person, you have to really care about them. You have to really want to heal them, to be part of their solution, to make them better. And that has to be very important to you. Not because of the praise you'll get, not because, you're trying to get stronger and you can give yourself another gold star if you succeed, but just because you care about them. And we as humans have a whole bunch of stuff going on in our minds at the same time. Partly we want another gold star. Partly we want to, get better and succeed and learn. Partly, we want feedback that makes us feel that we're successful and good. Partly we want, to get some credit for what we do. And we have all these things that kind of flow in and out of our mind at the same time we're doing this. And with practice, that clears. And you get less and less of the peripheral stuff going on in your head and more focus on what it is you're trying to do. That's that state of being detached, where you're not, the average person has 5 or 6 or 10 things going on in their mind all the time. There's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and here's a little ego, here's a little fear, here's a little love, here's a little this, here's a little that, and stuff just a mishmash, all happening at once. And it kind of flits from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next very quickly. And when your mind works like that, it's really hard to put a strong intention behind it because your mind's skipping all over. So disciplining the mind is one of the fundamental exercises that we do that makes us better at healing. And you gain that discipline through doing. You know, like how do you gain discipline in anything? You know, in martial arts, in throwing a javelin, in swimming, in memorizing poetry, you know, whatever, you just do it and do it and do it. And eventually you've done it so much that it's easy to shut out everything else and just be with that. So it's the same thing here. It just takes practice and put in a lot of time.
Thank you, Tom. That was very insightful. I really appreciate that. That was super helpful in my in this my efforts. So I appreciate that.
That was a great question. Well, both of those. Next, we have up Ingeborg. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I have a question on a dream I had about 2 weeks ago. I was in a level of dream reality where I realized that everything is a kind of virtual reality, so LCS. But not only did I recognize it, but I'm at the place where I could leave the game. And it's not only about dying. No, you even leave all your concepts of this world and the hereafter, even the concept of eternal existence without a body. I could leave everything. This reality, the biggest form of, if you can imagine, would simply cease to exist. Even the existence as eternal spiritual essence, the concept of eternal source, Tom's concepts included everything. All this reality would also simply cease to exist and disappear without any trace. And in front of me, there was a bright void. I could have left this kind of loving co-creative space we are used to live in. What are your ideas on that?
So you say you had this void you could have gone to?
Yes.
And you had to make a choice as whether to go or not?
Yes.
Well, that was a test. Tests
Yes.
often come in terms of choices.
Uh-huh.
You know, they set up a situation and then they say, well, what do you choose? What do you want to do?
Uh-huh.
And you chose not to go off in the void, I guess.
Yes, of course, I was somehow irritated and shaken, even when I woke up for several days. And the effect was that I appreciated where we are living in a lot.
Yes, that was the choice. And the choice was to appreciate what you have. And often you can more appreciate what you have when you look at the absence of what you have. You know, you get very used to what you have, and that just becomes ordinary. And when it's ordinary, you kind of don't particularly give it a lot of importance or significance, and it just is, and it's part of your environment. But when it's all taken away and you see the emptiness that's there, then it's like, well, you know, all that stuff, I wasn't thinking, it wasn't much. I was getting ready to kind of, you know, throw it all away anyhow, but now I kind of changed my mind. Yeah, it's kind of nice where I live. So that was just a test to give you that opportunity to make that choice, because you were probably thinking some along the lines of all the stuff that was around that you had really wasn't all that important or that significant. And you were probably feeling a little distance from others and the world and stuff and this reality. And you're feeling really distanced from all of that. And so you got a choice. And the choice kind of lets you see all the stuff that you take for granted as actually you shouldn't take for granted. It's a pretty wonderful place to learn and grow. So I think that's what you had. It was the system just gave you a choice and you made your choice, and I think that was a good choice.
Thanks, Ingeborg. Tom, do you have a technique for remembering dreams?
Well, there's several techniques that are used for people who want to remember their dreams. One is keeping a diary, a dream diary. If every time you have a dream, you start writing it down, that will make it easier to remember, because what it does is it lets you focus on the dream. Dreaming now is a bigger part of your life. It's not just something that happens that you don't care about. It's something you do care about. And just because you care about it, you start to spend more focus on it. And the more you focus on it, then the more you remember and the more dreams you have. And pretty soon, if you stay focused on those dreams, you have very, very intricate dreams every single night. And you start seeing patterns in those dreams and so on. So a dream log is one way to remember dreams, but it takes a while. When you first start writing them down, you may only have a decent dream worth writing down, once a week or once a month. But the more you write them down, the more you think about them, the more they're a part of your life, then the more of them you'll get, and the more stuff that will happen in them. They will become richer and more eventful. Think about your dreams as you being put in situations where you have to make choices. And how do you make those choices? Because in the dream world, you don't have the image that you carry around in this world. In this world, there are certain ways to act. There's things that are proper and things that are improper, things that are accepted by your culture and things that aren't accepted by your culture. And you have all kinds of things that for the reasons of why you do and think what you do and think, just because of being in this culture with all its rules and expectations. In the dream realm, you just are who you are. And what you choose and what you do is just the way you are. So all the cultural wrappers that you have around yourself when you're in this physical reality kind of disappear there. And you get the real core you making those choices without the cultural wrappers. And that will tell you a lot of things about yourself, and you can learn a lot from dreams. So that's, a suggestion would be to keep track of your dreams and look at yourself and the things you do and the choices you make, and realize that most of that has been given to you by the LCS. Sets of choices that you can learn from. Just like Ingeborg, she had these thoughts about the life being pretty mundane and uninteresting, and then suddenly she sees, the other side of it. Yeah, well, you take all this for granted. What if you didn't have any of it? And then suddenly that stark nothingness makes what you got seem pretty good. So the system will give you choices like that. Most of your dreams are single player games. We talk about the physical reality here as a multiplayer game, virtual reality. Well, most of your dreams are single player games. It's you and a bunch of non-player characters, NPCs, are the other people in the dreams. Now, not all of your dreams. Some dreams are, can be very different, but just your typical dream is a single player game, and you're given things to make choices. Some of your choices might seem mundane, but most of them have some significance to them, some lesson in them. And if you remember your dreams and think, you can kind of reinforce those lessons so that you'll learn them more quickly. So I'm in favor of, kind of watching your dreams and paying attention to them. You'll learn a lot if you do that.
Tom, if I may interrupt here quickly, Michael had a question about dreams, and this is a really good spot to just have him pitch a comment in, maybe something specific about his question. Michael, you want to go ahead?
Yes, please. Thanks. Yeah, it ties in beautifully to that question. So why are dreams so hard to remember? I've been doing the whole dream journal thing where I care about the dreams and I put effort into remembering them. And then it does work. But I find if I let that slip a little bit, I seem to drift back into not remembering them at all, like at all. So then I kind of get to wonder, well, is it worth putting in all that effort to remember them? Whereas I could just maybe just trust my being level working with the LCS, every night and not really having to bring that here back into PMR at my intellectual level. I only have so much focused intent to spend kind of every day.
Mhm.
And one example is so I've tried as an example, as a comparison between, going to sleep, okay, I'm going to remember my dreams. I've got my dream journal right here versus, no, I'm going to focus my intent on making, the best decisions in this dream, whatever comes up, that's what I'm going to do. And I could, I've been experimenting with that a little bit. So yeah, I'm just wondering what you think there.
Okay. I think it's probably worthwhile keeping track of your dreams, because it just makes that dream time, that dream time is a time when you make choices and you learn from them. Just like your awake time here in the physical reality, you have choices and you learn from them. So it's just another reality in which you make choices from which you can learn, from which you can evolve or de-evolve, depending on your choices. But if you don't pay attention to them, you still will learn from them, but not as quickly and not as well. Just like here, if all the choices you make in the physical reality, you just make the choice and you forget the choice. You just go through life doing what you do without any kind of thinking about, why did I do that? Is that good? Is that helpful? Is that high entropy or low entropy? If you don't think about it, you don't learn as much. If you do think about it, then you'll learn more, because, we all have lots of opportunities to learn, but we have to grasp that opportunity and learn from it, make something of it. And that takes our intention. So learning from dreams means you'll get a lot more out of your dreams. If you don't, you'll still get something out from your dreams. You still learn something, but you just won't learn it as quickly. It'll be a slow process rather than a quick process, just like here in the physical reality. If you don't pay any attention to why you do what you do, your learning will just be slower than if you do pay attention of why you do what you do here. Same in the dreams. So for that reason, I'd say, sure, make the most of the opportunities you have. You should do that. Now, you seem to have trouble remembering your dreams. It's not gotten easy yet. It seems like it's still kind of a chore to make that happen.
Why are it seems like that way for most people on, humans here, dreams are generally tough to remember and you have to put a lot of effort into it. And if you stop putting in that effort, it goes away again. So yeah.
One reason for that is that the system would like to keep the two worlds separate. Dream reality, no image, the real you, and this reality, and not get those two confused. If you were confused as to which one you were in, it would, it would be very, life would become more difficult, not better. So they keep those separate. You got two different realities that you're in. Each one has its own modes. Each one has its own things that it's good at and things that it's not so good at. The dream reality is good in one way, is that really wild and crazy things can happen to you. You end up with choices that you'd never have here. Dramatic choices, very meaningful choices that would be very costly here. You wouldn't want to have those choices here. And the consequences in the dream world, you don't have a lot of consequences for the choices that you make. You just make them and here's what happens. But it's not like you have to, if it was a bad choice, that you have to pay for that, the rest of your life. Whereas here, you make a really bad choice and, it may take decades or never getting over it. You may pay for it for a long time. So they're just different in the way in the way it works. So the dream place is really a good place to experiment and go, you can be a little wilder there in the sense that you don't have the price to pay afterwards. Here, there's a long trail of connectedness because of our rule set, how you affect other people, the things that you do. It doesn't just end with you waking up. You've affected a lot of other people, and that lives on as consequences. So they're very different, and it's best to get as much as you can out of both. But it's good not to get them confused. You need to know you can't be so cavalier here. That's let the cookie crumble however it does. That doesn't work too well here. Here you need to be more thoughtful. So I think there's an inclination to keep them separate. The only way that you make that dream reality more real to you here is by focusing on it. And just focusing on it, trying to make it important to you. But, Michael, some things, sometimes it's time for this, and sometimes it's not time for that. So if it's time for you to learn from your dreams, it would probably work out really well. If that's kind of superfluous, maybe later would be better. So in general, don't push things. It's better not to push on things, to force them to be the way you think they ought to be. It's usually better just to go with the flow. If you're having trouble and the dreams seem to, you're putting a lot of effort into it, but you're not getting much out of it, then I'd say let it go for a while. Try it again next year. Try it again some other time when you think that maybe it would work better. Maybe you need to focus more on what's happening here. So in general, trying to force things. Oh, I know that dreaming is important, so damn it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Trying to make things happen is usually not such a good idea. It's much better to let things happen. So if you're trying because your intellect says it's a good thing to do, but it's not working, ease off. Let it go for a few months or a few years, whatever feels right to you, and then try it again. Got to have the long view. You can't do everything now or experience everything now. You got to say, well, I'm going to be growing up for the next 50 years, 60 years. I got time to explore different modes of being. Have that long approach.
Yeah, thank you. Just one quick side comment, but you don't have to respond. I've noticed any sort of NPMR experiences of mine also tend to have that memory slippage effect, as in when I'm dreaming. So that's been a thing, just trying to remember as much as I can coming back. But anyways, thank you.
Yeah. Well, that takes practice, and that's, I guess, in a way, a similar but some different reason. In your meditations, that happens because your meditations are experienced almost entirely through the intuitive side. The intuition doesn't do anything other than just get information. It gets a download. The intuition gets information, gets things. And what you do with it, I guess, is up to you, how you interact with it. But you don't analyze it. Whereas in this reality, you run into things and you analyze them. You judge them. Oh, what was that? Is this helpful? Should I do this again? And you've got all of this stuff around them, your analysis, your judgment, your assessments. Whereas the things in your intuition, you don't have that intellect doing the judging and assisting and assessing and an analysis. Well, you just get some information. Okay. Next. Okay, got that. Next. Oh yeah, I see that too. Okay, I see the pattern there. Next. And things just come and you have experiences. But because you're not judging and assessing them, you're just having them. They don't stick in the memory so well. They kind of slip right through that memory because you just have them and let them go. Now, with practice, you can remember them. What I did when I was out at Monroe's, I keep referring to Monroe because a lot of these questions that you have, I had. And I went through the same kind of things, trying to figure them out. What's this mean? How does this work? So I refer back to that a lot. That's where a lot of my learning took place. So anyhow, when I was at Monroe's, there'd be things that I knew would be important to remember. So I'd pause in my non-physical state and say, I want to remember this. And I'd repeat what I wanted to remember. I'd distill it. I'd do that with my intellect. I'd assess it. I'd remember it. I'd repeat it. And then I'd go on. And then 15, 20 minutes, half an hour later, I'd remember that I was supposed to remember it. So I'd go back and I'd repeat it and I'd say it and I'd focus it in my mind and then I'd go on. And sometimes by the time I got to the end of my session, I have 5 or 6 things all stacked up. Each one I'd gone back to maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times to implant it in my memory. And eventually, after doing that, I found out I didn't have to do that, but that was the process that taught me. But I found out I didn't have to do that. I could bring my intellect in if my intellect would just sit down and behave and let my intuition be in control. So if you can tame your intellect to where it's not always trying to be the leader and be in control and assess and value and judge, and it just sits down and does what you ask it to do, that you actually can bring your intellect and it can work with your intuition. And the two of them can work like a team. But up until you get to that point, it's either you're in your intuitive mode or you're in your intellectual mode. And one of them will crash the other. If you're in your intuitive mode and you get in the intellectual, boom, your intuitive mode goes away. That's the way it is initially. But eventually, you can train that intellect to be a team player rather than in charge. It's used to being in charge because it's been in charge of your whole life. Probably since you were about 5 years old and went to school, the intellect's been in charge of your life. And it's hard to break that habit of being in charge of your life. But you can break the habit and let it work with the intuition. Then it becomes much easier to remember things because now your intellect goes along with you. And you and your intellect can go on those adventures together. Your intellect stays quiet, doesn't think or say anything unless it's needed. And then it may pop in for just a few fractions of a second and do what it does or remind you of something, and then it pops back out again. So something to look forward to. You're still struggling. You're real young yet, but it takes time to learn all these nuances and things about life and reality and how it works. But you've got the rest of your life to figure it all out. But eventually, your intellect does come along, and you have both working together. And then remembering what happens is easy because that part of you that does remember is with you.
Thank you very much, Tom. All right, now we're going to move on to Maurice. Maurice, would you like to say your question?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. I am from Germany, and my question is, in one time in my life, I had an experience where I lay in my bed and I think about the thing, okay, when does my friend arrive at my house? And I don't know, in my mind pops out, okay, it's like 9 o'clock, and I don't know how to describe, but I knew she would come at this time to my house, but I don't know, she's 3 hours away from car, and she said, I don't know when to come, when she come, and everybody has the personal perception, but I only had this one time, this universal perception. How can I train this, or how can I do better with this? Like Robert Monroe did this with you, Tom, and the friend, because they ask you, okay, because he knew when you both had time that you visited him. Do you understand the question? Sorry for my bad English.
I think So you occasionally, or have had at least once, and maybe several occasions, had connections with people and know when they might arrive, what they're doing, even what they're feeling and thinking, or that you were going to get a phone call from that person, or you'd like to call that person, and then they call you just when you're thinking about you'd like to call them. And you're making these connections, but the connections are just whenever they happen to happen. You don't feel like you really have any control over them. They sometimes happen, sometimes don't. And you're wondering, how can I develop this into something that's more useful rather than just an occasional knowledge that I'm connected with other people and they're connected with me. So is that sort of the question?
Um, no, I mean the question like this. I view my perception on something. You can view your perception on you, and the universal perception is that you throw your mind at one thing, and then I don't know, the LCS uh, news this that okay, this is the answer that I don't know how to describe, but it's something like you know what will happen exactly on this situation. Like you write this down in your book with Robert Monroe, and he knew it exactly when you both had time that you are arriving at his house. And I mean this one is that you know what are gonna happen, that I want to do the right decision for my life because I'm so confused. And yes,
Okay, so you're talking more about precognition, where
yes,
you learn what is going to happen. And when you
yes,
get that information, and then sometimes it does happen precisely that way, not just similar, but
yes, yes, yes,
precisely
yes,
that way. I mean,
yes,
even down to the last tiny detail,
yes,
it happens that way. And then
yes,
she was eating, and a pea fell off of her spoon, rolled across the table, and hit the floor, and the dog ran over and ate it. That's very specific. And sure enough, that happens, even the most specific details. Yeah, that's you getting data out of the probable future database. And that data is available. When your intent wanders toward a particular individual, then you tend to collect information. And if you're collecting the information out of the future probable database, then they call that precognitive. You get the information before it happens. Well, that's a thing that can happen. And you can learn to do that more when you want to rather than just whenever it happens, just with practice. But some people have a knack for it and they get this precognition kind of all the time, like it just happens to them. I knew a guy had a website. I think the website's gone now, but he had this happen to him almost every night, every day. He'd have these kinds of things going on in his life, and he experimented with it. I think the name of the website is You Are Dreaming was the name of his website, but I think it's gone now. Anyhow, you may be one of these people that has a proclivity to experiencing these sorts of things, and I would encourage you to play with it, connect with it. He even did some things where in his precognitive dream, he would interact with a particular person and do a particular thing and get a particular reaction from them. One time he wanted to see whether he could do something in the dream and then actually have that happen. Like in the dream, he would take something and leave a mark, someplace, like you know, some kind of black marker or something. He'd leave a mark. And then when he got there, see if the mark was actually there. In other words, could he have an effect in the future while he was doing that? And he was doing experiments like that. And I think he started probably pretty much the way you are. He just had a proclivity for that sort of thing. So he just played with it. The more you play with it, the more it happens. The more it happens, the more you learn. And then it happens even more, and it just keeps going. So if that's something that's happening to you, see what you can learn from it. If you can if there's certain situations where it happens, or certain kinds of dreams that you have where it happens in a dream, or maybe it's not a dream. Maybe you just sit there and you got the idea in your mind. It doesn't have to come from a dream. There are precognitive dreams, but there's just precognitive intuition too. And try to get as much detail as you can. So enjoy it, have fun with it, play with it, don't abuse it. There may be ways that you could abuse it, getting information and then using that to your own benefit, but don't abuse it. But it's just part of the data that's available. So I don't know if I'd answered your question or not, but it sounds like this is happening to you enough to make you want to ask the question. So it's probably not just
Yes.
a one-off experience that happened one day and never happened again. It's probably something that keeps occurring. Well, write it down. Try to write the thing down, log it. You know, here's the precognitive thing I had. I got this information, and write it down, what it felt like, what happened. Write it down, date it. You know, and then if that happens exactly like that in life, then remark about it. You know, write that down. Take pictures if you can. In other words, document it, because the very act of documenting it, not only will that make it credible when you share it, but it actually makes it happen more often and brings it more under your control. The documenting itself becomes a significant part of the learning process. In documenting the details, you'll start to feel and see things that you wouldn't get otherwise. You'll learn more that way.
Great. Thank you, Tom, because it's like when I look at you and I'm in this meditative state, it's really relaxing. And yes, but you helped me a lot. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Adam,
Thank
Jamie,
you.
and everyone.
Thank you. It's
And
been
Nathan.
wonderful. I'm glad
Thank
so
you
many
so
people
much.
came. That's good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we had a
Very good.
big
Thank you,
one
Tom.
today, huh?
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you all for
you.
being here.
Thank you,
You're
Tom.
very
you.
welcome. Bye-bye.